Thank you, Humberto. My name is Catherine Eister, and I am the Chief of Staff at the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center. We are an independent 501c3 nonprofit that works to promote people-centered policies and ensure that the communities most impacted by policy decisions have a voice in shaping them. Thank you for joining us for this briefing this afternoon, Due Process Denied, How the Trump Administration's Immigration Policies Threaten Our Civil Rights. Before we begin, I have two brief notes. First, while we are going to dig into policy discussions, we will not engage in any electoral or partisan conversations during this briefing. And second, we've enabled, in addition to translation, we have automatic closed captioning. So to turn this on, you can go to the meetings control toolbar at the bottom of your screen and click captions and then show captions. This is AI, so it's imperfect. So when we send around the recordings of the webinar in the coming days, it will have closed captioning available. So we are here today to discuss the profound dangers of the Trump administration's immigration agenda, particularly for the immigrant community suffering under it, but also for everyone in this country who's vulnerable to this administration's blatant disregard for constitutional protections and for due process. The Trump administration's agenda, which has been shaped by far-right influencers and Project 2025, is rooted in tearing families apart, in disappearing people from their communities, in suppressing dissent, expanding mass detention, and about using fear as a tool of social and political control. And the administration's unconstitutional actions have largely been condoned and rubber-stamped by the ultra-conservative Supreme Court majority, which, in the words of Justice Sotomayor, is rewarding lawlessness. And this enforcement regime is not just targeting immigrants. We're also witnessing the weaponization of detention and state power against union organizers, student activists, and political opponents. And we see that this is part of a broader authoritarian agenda that puts us and our democracy in danger. As folks may know, just last week, Republicans in Congress passed a massive reconciliation bill that slashes healthcare and nutrition programs to give tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans. It also pumps an unprecedented $170 billion into our immigrant detention and deportation machines. But against all of this, there is also resistance. The immigration justice movement has been organizing, litigating, and fighting for the dignity and safety long before this administration, and these leaders and communities are bravely meeting this moment. From courtrooms to rural schools and city streets, we are seeing people stand up for their neighbors, for their families, and for our fundamental rights. At the CPC Center, we are proud to support and amplify this work and the progressive champions who continue to fight for a better future for us all. I'm really thrilled to turn to our panelists today who are on the front lines of this fight. And to begin today's briefing, I'm delighted to turn to remarks from Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. Congresswoman Jayapal represents Washington's 7th District and is serving her 5th term in Congress. She's the first South Asian American woman elected to the U.S. House and one of only a few naturalized citizens who are serving in Congress today. Congresswoman Jayapal has been a leader on immigration in Congress. She's been fighting the administration's inhumane policies of separating children from parents. She's been crafting legislation to create a fair and humane immigration system. And long before Congress, she spent 20 years in global public health and as a leading advocate for women's and immigrants' rights, including founding Washington State's largest immigrant advocacy organization, One America. We're so grateful to her ongoing leadership and for her remarks to help ground this conversation. Let me turn it over.
Thank you, Catherine, for that kind introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon as we gather to learn, inform, strategize, and organize our way toward a more fair, just, and inclusive country. I'm Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, and I'm honored to represent Washington's 7th Congressional District in the House of Representatives, where I also served as the chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus from 2019 until the beginning of this year. And now I get to serve as the proud chair emerita. I'm also proud to be the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on Immigration, the first ever naturalized citizen to do so. And in that position, I am using my power to fight back against the Trump administration's cruel, inhumane, unconstitutional immigration policies. From the random kidnapping and disappearing of immigrants of all legal statuses, to the attempted revocation of student visas, to the complete denial and elimination of due process, this authoritarian administration is doing everything they can to stir up fear and anger toward immigrants and enact a complete crackdown on all forms of immigration. We have seen this in horrifying cases that the entire country has come to be familiar with. Kilmar Abrego Garcia, Remesa Ozturk, Mahmoud Khalil, and so many others have been taken from before our very eyes and shipped off to detention centers and prisons hundreds of miles away from their homes. They have not been given access to due process, to proper legal counsel, and their families have been left to wonder about their safety for weeks and months on end. We have also seen Donald Trump devastate our legal immigration system, terminating TPS for countries like Haiti, Venezuela, Afghanistan, Nicaragua, and Honduras. His administration has canceled legal status for hundreds of thousands of individuals by ending parole programs. And when Trump and Republicans say that they are going after, quote, the worst of the worst, and that they only want to end undocumented immigration, they are lying. They are going after immigrants of all legal statuses, including US citizens. And if they can eliminate due process for one group of people, they absolutely can do it for everyone. And that's what we need to communicate to Americans across this country. The reality is that immigrant families are living in constant fear of ICE raids on their homes or their workplaces, of neighbors or loved ones being grabbed by masked and anonymous ICE agents on the street and thrown into a van to be disappeared. And just last week, Republicans passed and Trump signed their big bad betrayal bill, which supercharges ICE's budget by a magnitude of 13, giving this lawless agency more money to continue their unacceptable behavior with zero oversight or accountability. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It is maddening, it's depressing, it's shocking, and somehow it just keeps getting worse. But through it all, we have to stay hopeful and vigilant. We have to stay active and engaged. Why? Because our country depends on it. That's why, as ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee, I've been hosting shadow hearings to shine a light on some of this cruelty and lawlessness and inform the public of what Trump and ICE are doing. These shadow hearings have brought in experts, lawyers, other important voices to talk about Trump's tactics, their illegality, and what we can do to stand up and fight back. I'll keep up this work because if Republicans won't conduct oversight as Trump tramples on the Constitution, I will. And I believe that Americans don't like what they're seeing. We see that reflected in the polling. We see Trump's approval numbers continue to go down as the American people find out more and more about what Trump is doing to undermine due process. Look, I believe that we need to create the America we deserve. I came to this country at 16 years old with nothing in my pockets, and I join you now as a member of Congress. I know the American dream is possible because I have lived it. And that is the dream we have to keep alive for all of those who still see our country as a beacon of hope. So thank you so much for your work and your dedication to making this country a more perfect union.
Thank you so, so much, Congresswoman. And we will share information about these shadow hearings and our follow-up materials that she referenced. Now, I'm really excited to introduce the rest of our panel, and they will start joining me on the screen. Kica Matos is an amazing leader and is president of the National Immigration Law Center and the NILC Immigrant Justice Fund. She joined NILC and IJF as Executive Vice President of Programs and Strategy in 2023. Kica has extensive experience as an advocate, community organizer, and lawyer. I am now going to turn to Neha Desai, who is the Managing Director of Children's Human Rights and Dignity at the National Center for Youth Law, where she leads the organization's work on behalf of children in the immigration system and beyond. Neha has represented and advocated on behalf of children who are in government custody for nearly 20 years. And finally, Lisa Sherman Luna is the executive director of the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, where she previously served as the policy director. In 2001, Lisa's family made the difficult decision to move from Nashville from Guatemala, which has shaped her commitment to fighting for an immigration system where everyone can access safety, opportunity, and belonging. We are so grateful to each of you for your work and for your time today. So to start us off, Kica, I'm going to start with you to help ground us in the seriousness of this moment. So we often think about due process as relating to the court system, right? But you've written about how fear, profiling, and mass surveillance also function to deny people due process in everyday life. So can you sort of start with how we should understand these tools as threats to our civil rights long before the courtroom?
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay? Thank you so much for pulling us all together during a tough week and a very challenging time as a nation. I call myself a recovering lawyer, and I do head up a legal advocacy organization, but I pride myself in using plain English when I talk about legal issues. And so I really appreciate your question about due process. And I'd say a couple of things. First, just want to remind everybody that the Constitution applies to all of us. It guarantees all people, not just citizens, but all people, the due process that the process that is due before we are deprived of our life and our liberty. Due process sounds pretty dry and trite when you read our Constitution, but in reality, due process packs a really mighty punch, and it is what distinguishes our democracy from tyranny. When the government begins to violate our due process rights repeatedly is when we really start seeing the demise of our democracy. In the context of what is happening right now all over the country, let me offer some concrete examples about what that really means. Our due process rights are violated when our neighbors are snatched off the streets, violently kidnapped and shoved into SUVs. This is happening everywhere, including in my city. Our due process are denied when masked men show up in immigration court hearings to whisk people away because they followed the government's orders to show up to court to preside over the hearings. Our due process rights are trampled on when people are summarily sent to another country without recourse to a court simply because they are brown and from Venezuela and happen to have tattoos that our government does not understand or approve of. And here's the thing, right? This administration right now is systematically denying the due process rights, particularly of immigrants. And so what that means is many people in the country don't realize what's actually happening because they're not being directly affected. But the danger is that eventually all of our due process rights will be violated, right? Due process violations will eventually affect all of us. And with that loss also comes the loss of our democracy. I will say just a little bit more just to contextualize the moment that we find ourselves in. Our analysis is that this administration really has been launching a full frontal assault on our democracy, right? And to do this, they have started with immigrants. And here's the thing, they have started with immigrants, but they will not end with immigrants. We have a president right now who is reshaping this country in his image and working to amass and consolidate his power. I want to run through quickly, right? Because I've got the receipts to explain what I mean by that. So let me mention a few of the things that I want to point to affirm our analysis, right? Let's start with the executive order around birthright citizenship. It's one of the first things that this administration did, right? With a stroke of a pen, they decided that Section 1 of the 14th Amendment was no longer going to be valid. So we're just going to revoke birthright citizenship. This is illegal It is absurd, and even the most conservative members of the current Supreme Court know that, right? As a result of this effort to revoke birthright citizenship, we're now having to deal with this devastating Supreme Court decision that now limits the power of federal courts to issue nationwide rulings. And what this really means is that it will be really hard now for us to stop acts by this administration that blatantly violate the Constitution, something that we have seen them do on a regular basis. We have now, as a country, officially closed the doors to people seeking asylum, right? Imagine what that has done to our standing in the global community and what that will do for generations who are now being denied the opportunity to start a new life. In the context of immigration, and this has happened uniquely in the context of immigration, there have been 4 instances where this administration has just flat out ignored judicial rulings, right? Think about that. And finally, I just want to end with the deportation machinery and talking about what that has done and what that will do because of the reconciliation bill. This deportation machinery now is faster, it's more vicious, and it's more Kafkaesque, and it's likely to get much worse. So what are we seeing? Let me end with this, Catherine, and I hope I don't depress you. We're seeing ICE using a fast track process called expedited removal to disappear people and quickly deport them without giving them the chance to ever come before a judge. Right? We're seeing masked officers grabbing people in courthouses when they show up to their immigration hearings or when they show up to their immigration check-ins. They vanish. People say, my relative is gone, right? And they leave loved ones and lawyers, right, with the frantic task of finding out what's happened to this person who all of a sudden just vanished into thin air. What that has meant in real life is that often for days on end, people are frantically looking for their clients or their loved ones. And then they'll get a call from the disappeared husband or wife or child, terrified and destitute and calling from a country that they may not even know. And yes, to confirm what I just said, ICE is deporting people to countries that they've never been to or heard of, countries that are notorious for human rights records, right? Just this week, 9 men were sent to South Sudan with the Supreme Court's blessing, and we have no way of knowing the horrors that await them. And finally, ICE agents are using tactics that are more brutal than any of us could have imagined. They're smashing car windows, they're ripping parents away from their kids, they're targeting children even while they are in school. In my own neighborhood, just 2 weeks ago, ICE kidnapped a woman who was driving her 8 and 13-year-old kids to school. Right? They yanked her out of the car, they handcuffed her, and they left her kids behind with the engine still running. So these are some of when we talk about due process and what's happening, Catherine, these are some of the things that are happening in the context of immigration.
It's incredibly, incredibly helpful and heartbreaking. And I don't think your job was to uplift on this first question. So I appreciate the depth. Kica, for those of us who aren't following things as closely and don't have the legal background that you all do, there have been administrations in the past, right, that have done, Democrat and Republican, that have done really damaging and harmful things. We know that the immigration system has long been plagued by dysfunction and harm. But what you're underscoring is that a lot of this is far more dangerous and unprecedented than what has come before. So can you unpack a little bit what in these horrors you're describing truly is new and is raising the greatest alarms for you?
Yeah, at the risk of aging myself, let me say that I've been doing immigration work for 23 years. And in the 23 years that I've been doing this work, it has never been so scary and so bad and so alarming. And I would say that the thing that strikes me the most is that as an organization, NILC and point to Lisa's work, TIRRC and others are really confronted with a challenge of not just fighting on behalf of immigrants during a very dark moment, but fighting for our very democracy. Because the framework that is being used to chip away not even chip away, but to very intentionally and violently violate due process rights and constitutional rights of immigrants is the very framework that is being used to undermine our democracy. What makes this moment different, I will just simply say, is the audacity of the lawlessness and the cruelty, the unapologetic open racism and xenophobia, the intentionality of this president's effort to consolidate his power. And let me point to some recent examples of the way this really is really cutting into our democracy. Think about LA earlier this week, just a few days ago. I think many of us saw the footage of armed military officers in battle fatigues storming MacArthur Park in LA. It was chilling, it was horrifying, and no one, even to this day, understands the purpose of this military flex. We believe the purpose really was to instill fear and to intimidate. And I want to note that there were 9 different federal agencies involved in this useless and shameless show of force, right? Let's not forget, right? It's been more than 100 days since this administration took 300 young men and sent them to El Salvador, to a torture prison that is notorious. Right? And how did they do this? They committed this act by invoking a wartime power that's rarely been ever used, the Alien Enemies Act. And let me ask a rhetorical question to you and to others on the panel and people in the audience. Did you know that the US now is at war and that there has been an invasion, right? That is what this administration is claiming, right? That we are being invaded by Venezuela and that we are at war with them. And that is what justifies the use and the invocation of these military laws, right? So these men were sent away without even being given an opportunity to go before a judge, right? And the administration has been lying regularly about them. And they sit right now incommunicado in a prison very few have emerged from alive. And they're there indefinitely. They may be there for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, 40 years, who the hell knows, right? And this moment is also different because of the breakdown of checks and balances, right? Congress, we think, is enabling this lawlessness. You talked about the reconciliation bill, but let me talk about it in the context of immigration. $170 billion, right, have now been given to DHS to ramp up this enforcement machinery. So that is what I think about in the context of what is happening in your question.
Thank you. One more, just follow up on this, Kica. You've underscored that what we're seeing, right, isn't just more enforcement, right? It's not just the volume of enforcement, which maybe even supporters of this administration thought that they were supporting, but that it's more fundamentally about also attacking constitutional rights, about bypassing Congress, about disobeying court orders. And where you started, you were talking about how immigration is being used as a testing ground, right, for this further erosion of legal protections and civil rights more broadly. Can you take the next few steps here? Where do you see them headed? Where do you think this this will continue to push against rights and communities?
Yeah, let me go back a little bit and just briefly remind us where this all began, because this was not accidental. This is a process that began under Trump 1.0. And then under the Biden years, we saw Project 2025 and America First Legal really develop a blueprint for what we are seeing being rolled out right now. You know, and from there emerged some of the things that we saw Trump campaign on and some of the issues, right? He set the stage. So we had 2 organizations laying out the blueprint. And then while Trump campaigned, he set the stage to be able to demonize immigrants, to make all of this first to instill fear and to facilitate what we're seeing right now. So I'll remind you some of the things that he campaigned on, right? He threatened to carry out the largest deportation plan ever undertaken in the history of the United States. He threatened to set up detention camps. He threatened to revoke birthright citizenship. And then he combined these with these very intentional efforts to demonize immigrants, particularly people of color, saying that immigrants are criminals and they're rapists and they're even eating people's pets in Springfield, Ohio, right? And that is what really began to set the groundwork for what we're seeing right now. And so today, what's happening is this administration is building this authoritarian regime on the backs of immigrants, right? And so on top of everything that I've talked about, the anti-immigrant policies, the fear mongering, the lawlessness, right? That should be enough to concern all of us, regardless of whether or not we're immigrants. But on top of everything else, let me point to some recent events that really should alarm all of us, because it's almost like an example of the walls closing in and the further erosion of our democracy. Right, we saw what happened in LA with the National Guard and the Marines being deployed there. We saw them flexing. I just talked about what happened in MacArthur Park, right? We watched with horror when the DHS Secretary Security officers assaulted Senator Padilla, who dared to attend a press conference of hers to ask a question, right? What did they do? They physically threw him to the ground and they had handcuffed him. They roughed him up and they let him outside. We saw Mayor Baraka from Newark, New Jersey, being arrested outside of a detention center. We saw Congressman Nadler's staffer being handcuffed by ICE. We saw a mayoral candidate in New York being arrested by ICE, right? And so while this administration may today threaten the safety and security of immigrants and those who are out on the front lines, let's be clear about one thing, and that's that the lawlessness and the unconstitutional crusade is going to eventually put all of us at risk. And so where do we go from here? I will end with this. We have to meet this moment with the urgency that it demands, because we're headed towards a new regime in which the president has amassed the kind of power that will allow him to detain and forcibly remove any person, immigrant or US born, that he chooses. And it is not an accident that he is now talking about the possibility of deporting US citizens. I'll leave you with that.
Thank you. Neha, turning to you. You serve some of the most vulnerable people in our country, immigrant children and those in federal immigration custody. So can you just sort of unpack for us specifically what legal protections exist for children who are detained in federal immigration custody?
Sure, Catherine. So the reality is that there are very, very limited protections for children detained in federal immigration custody, and those that do currently exist are all under really existential threat at this moment. So the three sources of law where protections are grounded are settlement agreements, which is really the outcome of litigation, federal legislation, and the Constitution, from which new protections can and have been built. So in terms of settlement protections, the most sweeping and significant one that really sets the foundation here is the Flores settlement, which is a case, comes from a case that our organization and co-counsel filed all the way back in 1985. And it was litigated up and down the circuits with a trip to the Supreme Court, and it finally settled in the 90s in 1997 with a settlement that is essentially an agreement between the government and plaintiffs, so children detained in custody, represented by us and co-counsel, to set really, really basic rudimentary standards for the custody, detention, and release of kids. So when I say basic, I mean access to water and food and emergency medical services, right? These are not sort of sweeping protections, but they're incredibly fundamental, and all of those are under threat right now because the government has filed a motion to terminate the settlement in its entirety. This comes as no surprise. It was outlined in Project 2025. It was mentioned on the campaign trail numerous times that this has really been a target of the administration to entirely get rid of these protections. And we've been through this before. We litigated this during Trump 1.0. We prevailed. Unfortunately, we are not as well situated in this moment because they wrote this motion this time around as effectively a love letter to the Supreme Court, and that is absolutely where they intend to go. We didn't make it to the Supreme Court during round one, but if they are successful in appealing up to the Supreme Court, we are very vulnerable and concerned, but we will fight with everything we have. So the next area is federal legislation, and the most significant legislation that establishes protections here for this population is the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008, which was signed with incredible bipartisan support. And this was back at a time where unaccompanied children, so children detained on their own in custody without a parent or legal guardian, were not politicized, right? They were seen as a population that all parties could come together and agree, like, we're deserving of protection and warranted really specific protections. Unfortunately, we are in a very different moment, and the TVPRA has come under attack really since Trump won, but through incredible advocacy from the field, there have been multiple ways in which we have prevailed against those attacks until last week. So unfortunately, the reconciliation bill, now law, included a number of provisions that significantly undermine protections in the TVPRA and make unaccompanied children significantly more vulnerable. And then finally, with the Constitution. So the Constitution, as Kica mentioned, applies to all children. Every single child in federal immigration custody has the protection of the Constitution, at least in theory. And we have used the Constitution to file litigation and expand the rights of kids. So during Trump 1.0, we filed a case called Lucas R. that established new due process protections for kids in custody who were being stepped up to more restrictive settings without any due process. So all of a sudden they went from a shelter facility to a secure setting like jail, or to residential treatment facility with no hearing, no opportunity to contest allegations against them. And we were successful in establishing due process protections for those kids and a couple of other subclasses. But we all know that the Constitution is under attack right now. And as we see the attacks to the Constitution, we have to know that this is going to impact immigrant kids along with every other individual in this country. And apologies, I will speak more slowly.
Thank you so much. So Neha, can you take us, down to the ground, to the level of your clients and the young people you're working with? Can you describe how the Trump administration's policies are impacting your clients and again, children just in their day-to-day?
Yeah. So there have been numerous policies enacted just in the past 6 months that have had two primary implications. One is the dramatic extension of the length of time that children are spending in custody. And secondarily is the dramatic exacerbation of the horrific conditions that kids find themselves in. So they're in custody longer, in worse conditions. And this applies really across the board to all children. So that's children that are arriving unaccompanied, that means without parent or legal guardian, placed in the custody of Health and Human Services. And it applies to children that are arriving with families and family units, those are known as accompanied children. And they're in the custody of the Department of Homeland Security. And there's really no better way to understand what these families are experiencing than hearing in their own words. So I'm going to read to you a couple of sentences from families that we very recently interviewed in custody. So this first one comes from a mom who was detained in DHS custody with her babies. She says, "My baby drinks formula, and it's important to make sure that the water I mix with the formula powder is clean. The cell we were detained in did not have any clean water. The water was visibly dirty. I tried drinking the water and it tasted terrible. So I asked the guards if I could get clean water, and they laughed at me. I asked the guards for bottled water, and they told me that I had to take water from the sink in the cell. And if my babies got sick, so be it." Another mom who had 3-year-old twins and was detained also in DHS custody said, "They yelled at me, 'Effing bitch, shut up.' They treated us like animals. The staff told us we were criminals and said, 'You can ask your God to save you if they exist.'" And this last one is from a very young child detained alone in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement and Health and Human Services. And he is separated from his mom effectively because his mom is undocumented. And at this point, it is virtually impossible for sponsors who are undocumented to come forward and take their children out of custody, even if they are the biological mom. And he said, "I talk to my mommy every day on the phone from the shelter. If I imagine arriving at her house and opening the door, the first thing I'm going to do is hug her. I'm going to hug her for a really, really, really long time. Then I just want to talk to her about anything. I want to talk and be together again."
You have a really hard job, and a really important job. So, Neha, just to sort of close out this bit, I know that the National Center for Youth Law, and you referenced, has played a vital role in upholding the protections under the Flores settlement and the protections for immigrant children in federal custody. So what is the administration's push to disregard and dismantle Flores actually mean for these children and for the broader erosion of longstanding legal protections for these children, for immigrant communities, and maybe for everyone?
Yeah, so what this really means is we would return to an area where these facilities are essentially just a black box, right? Few people, if any, will have access to the detention centers. And even if attorneys were to be able to find out about abuses occurring, they would have no straightforward way of holding the government accountable. Whereas right now, we can go to court, we can file motions to enforce. We've done repeatedly over the years, and as recently as just a couple of weeks ago, and over again during the first Trump administration. And every single time we have prevailed because we have come to the court with extensive evidence of how the government is violating these very basic agreements they came to years ago. And back when Flores was first filed in 1985, right, there was no separate system for serving children in immigration custody. They were treated exactly the same as adults were. They were strip searched. They experienced bodily cavity searches. A named plaintiff experienced a vaginal cavity search. Children were behind chain link fences. And again, they were treated as if they were adults without any particular provisions for them as children. So currently there are hundreds of facilities throughout the country where children are detained. And as Flores Council, we are amongst the only ones that are authorized to go into any of these facilities, to bear witness to what is happening, to interview children in a private setting, and to document the abuses they're experiencing. As the provision of legal services becomes more tenuous with the stripping of funding and the limitation of access, it just becomes more and more critical that there are opportunities for oversight and accountability. And both oversight and accountability will be severely lacking if Flores is terminated.
Thank you. Lisa, I want to bring you into the conversation, and talk about the really important work you're doing in Tennessee. So, despite and in the context of rising anti-immigrant extremism, TIRRC, the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, has continued to grow a powerful multiracial and multi-generational base in Tennessee. So can you tell us a bit about your work and how you've been able to build power in such a difficult time?
Yes, happy to. So it's no surprise to anyone that it's true that Tennessee is a tough political climate, but that's why our victories are so powerful and transformative. So for example, earlier this year during our legislative session, the state legislature filed 3 bills to kick out undocumented kids from public schools. This is part of a national right-wing strategy to essentially bring a test case to the Supreme Court to overturn Plyler versus Doe, which guarantees access to public education to all kids, regardless of their status. When this fight started, even though we've been so successful on killing hundreds of anti-immigrant bills over the years, I thought there is no way we're going to stop this in this political climate. But thankfully, with the push of our community, we still organized to stop the bill. And we were able to do this by organizing allies and building a coalition of more than 65 organizations representing all different kinds of issues: education, homelessness, civil rights. And we were able to organize faith leaders, small businesses, teachers, and principals to stand up for immigrant students. And we were successful. We killed the bill, despite the fact that nobody thought initially that we would do it. We were able to pull off Republican votes and stop the bill in its tracks this legislative session. These types of victories are, from a defensive posture, provide hope for so many others across the country, because if you can win in Tennessee, you can win anywhere. And by stopping this bill, we weren't just protecting kids in Tennessee, we were protecting kids all over the country. The defensive work is incredibly important, not just because it protects immigrants and refugees from extremely harmful legislation, but because it helps shape the narrative and it creates the space to have conversations that move people in support and help to build a coalition. Right now, the demographics in Tennessee, from a power building perspective, means that we can't write people off. We actually need to bring people into our movement. In a Republican supermajority, you can't paint Republicans with a broad brush. You have to see them as movable on different levels, and you have to be able to master the art of persuasion, which is exactly what we did with the Education for All fight in Tennessee. We didn't center that fight around immigration, but we centered it around kids and education for all. And by doing that, you open up the space to bring people in and start to then talk about immigration and how these policies impact not just immigrant children, but all of us. And we also framed the fight for education for all within the broader attack on public schools, joining together with Public School Strong campaign and other groups who were fighting a bill to take over Memphis School District. All of this means that the work on the defensive posture can be incredibly transformative, not just for the immigrant communities who can learn how powerful they are, but for a whole community. Connecting voucher fight to education fight. And when you have public victories like this and conversations, you help people process and understand immigration in a more positive light.
That's a really amazing example and success. So you're talking about the really broad coalition and solidarity you were able to build among the organizations, but seems like there's also a really important solidarity in realizing what the impacts and effects might be, right? So how are anti-immigrant policies serving as sort of the tip of the spear, right, for broader attacks on civil rights in the state?
Well, and on the example of education, the other thing that we really stressed and we worked to build with Black leaders in Tennessee, because we know that the fight to kick out immigrant students from public schools is just the beginning for kicking out other marginalized groups from our public schools and essentially dismantling our public school system as a whole. And as everybody here knows, Tennessee and the South have long been the tip of the spear on the fight for broader civil rights. This is why I always say our fight for a multiracial democracy began in the South. It's where it's being waged, and it's where it will ultimately be won. So nativist movements and other far-right actors have been investing for over a decade into cementing control in this region with racist gerrymandering, voter suppression, and deep and wide state preemption that is aimed at curving more progressive urban centers from being able to serve their diverse and vibrant communities. The most recent example of how immigration is being used is that in January, our governor called a special session to pass his landmark legislation around private school vouchers. It's deeply unpopular in the state, including in strong rural red areas. He added in hurricane relief to be able to try and use it as a leverage. And then at the last minute, he decided to throw in immigration as a way to peel off votes and use immigration as a wedge to pass his deeply unpopular private school vouchers. So he passed a law that not only incentivizes cooperation between state and local governments with ICE, but it actually created the first in the country office of an immigration czar that's staffed by a former ICE officer. And his whole job is to facilitate state and local collaboration with federal immigration enforcement using Tennessee taxpayer dollars. That office is actually shielded from public records request. Most shockingly, it made it a crime for local elected officials to vote on pro-immigrant policies with a 5-year prison sentence. It's now being challenged by the ACLU of Tennessee, and we're hopeful that it will not stand. But as you can imagine, it has created a chilling effect on local government and in their ability to support our communities. And we know that these are just test cases, right? First, they'll criminalize how you vote on pro-immigrant policies, and then they'll criminalize how you vote on other progressive issues. They also pass laws to criminalize churches and nonprofits who provide housing services to immigrant communities. And this has chilled the impact of service providers, nonprofits, churches, and other organizations in our state. Shortly after the session ended, in early May, we experienced devastating raids in Nashville, where the Tennessee Highway Patrol coordinated with ICE to stalk our most diverse neighborhoods, racially profile drivers, and pull them over for minor traffic violations. They immediately handed them over to ICE when they didn't have a driver's license. By the end of 10 days of terror on our streets, the Tennessee Highway Patrol had conducted 600 traffic stops with, I think, less than 20 actual citations, and ICE confirmed arresting about 200 individuals on civil immigration charges. Organizations like TIRRC had to spin into action to try and identify those individuals who were disappeared. We were able to identify half. The government never released the names of any of them. So we still don't even know who the other 100 are or where they are or what has happened to them. While our city was reeling from this and just living in utter terror for those 10 days, donors and nonprofits stepped up to support communities who were impacted by establishing a belonging fund. And our mayor came out in support of that fund. Immediately, Congressman Andy Ogles in our state legislature jumped on him and on us. And we saw exactly what we know about authoritarian power grabs: the work to discredit the organizations who are living into their mission and their values, the attack on the donor base, and the threat to local government officials with arrest or removing them from power. Now the two congressional committees are investigating our mayor, all for supporting a privately funded fund for immigrant communities. In an effort to be transparent, the mayor actually also released reports of ICE officers who'd called city agencies, part of a public records process. It did include the names of ICE officers, as it should, but immediately the legislature filed a bill to make it a crime for anyone to publicly share the names or faces of ICE officers. So that, combined with our open records shield and the attacks that we're seeing online of organizations like ours, of elected officials, of individuals who are taking action, just demonstrates that these actors want to operate with impunity. They want to chill our First Amendment rights. They want to chill our ability to defend our communities and live into our values. And ultimately, they want total control and to grab power for themselves.
So, Lisa, I'm gonna now turn to what is breaking through, how you are reaching folks. You started really beautifully by talking about how you're, building a broader tent, a broader coalition. So what messages or stories have been the most effective for you all in reaching people and shifting their perspectives on immigration policy or specific issues?
Yeah, I think Kica actually touched on this earlier, which is due process. It is resonating with folks, and it's important. We found that when we remind people that dehumanization is leading to the erosion of due process, and that people don't do anything to deserve due process, but that it is something that is inherent, that you are born with, is extremely important. And when we talk about, when we acknowledge people's natural anxieties, right, about our immigration system, the fact is that we all want order. We all want an orderly immigration system. It can be a system that is humane and that treats people with dignity, but we have to acknowledge that right now what we've had for many decades is not order, right? And so it's important to meet people where they're at and emphasize the shared values that we have. We can have due process. We can have an orderly system that is rooted in human dignity. The other thing for us is that if we have to be creative of who the messengers are, we have to take off our expert hat. It can't be polished anymore. It can't be based in policy or even the law. We actually were part of a project that worked with micro influencers And it was an influencer mom who had an immigrant background who used to use a lot of the bootstrap narrative, right? If you pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And we were able to work with her on a video about immigration. And it actually showed that the research showed that her video with our messaging was the most effective on moving white men. And so you have to be okay that it's not going to be perfect all the time. You have to be able, authenticity is what people want, and that's what people resonate with. And sometimes on the left, we're very, we like to police the way people talk, and we want people to use the right terminology, which is all really important. But if we really want to win the narrative, and if we really want to win as a multiracial coalition, we have to understand that we're meeting people where they're at, and we have to be ready to listen first and bring people in to the discussion. And when they feel listened and trusted, that is when you can start moving people along the spectrum.
That's really, really helpful and wise. I want to just ask a couple questions to everybody before we conclude today. I wanted to actually, Kica, if I can return to you, because you did bring up the recent Supreme Court ruling, and I want to make sure we touch upon this, right? So the recent ruling significantly limited the ability of any president's actions or policies, frankly, that may be unconstitutional, and this included allowing President Trump to effectively end birthright citizenship. I also know there's some break. Can you help us just understand the magnitude and impact of this ruling?
Yeah, I will try to do it as briefly as I can. You know, in essence, at the end of the day, this was an effort. It was about birthright citizenship, but it was also about the consolidation of power and a real effort on the part of the executive to disrupt the system of checks and balances and amass more power. Everybody knows is blatantly unconstitutional what the president did. He went ahead and did it anyway. He wanted to flex. And what ended up happening was something that was really quite terrible, because in essence, it was like this administration said, okay, even we sort of know that we probably won't prevail even with this conservative Supreme Court. So we're going to make it about something else. Right, so they made it about the consolidation of power. They asked the court to take away a federal judge's ability to issue nationwide injunctions halting illegal actions by the executive branch. And the Supreme Court basically rolled over and said, okay, right? And so as a result of that, I said it earlier, it's going to be so much harder to get nationwide relief when the Trump administration takes blatantly illegal actions. Right, they may do some terrible things like trying to revoke birthright citizenship, and up until now, we would have gasped and said, "Oh my God, that's unconstitutional." But we would have the expectation that lawyers would be able to go to a judge, and a judge would issue a nationwide injunction. Well, that's gone now, and that's been replaced by much more difficult and higher standard, which is that now you have to engage in class certification. So it's much more difficult now to try to get relief in courts. I will end by saying that there is a sliver of hope, and that's that today, the Asian Law Caucus and the ACLU and a few other organizations actually were able to certify a class. And so what that means is the federal judge granted a preliminary injunction and certified a provisional class. So this means two things in plain English. Right, it means that the executive order will be blocked, and that means that all babies, no matter what state they're born in, are still protected while the litigation continues. So I've been really trying hard to end on a positive note. So Catherine, I'll turn it over to you to say justice in this one has right now prevailed, and we should continue to fight with everything we have and hope that eventually we will get past this.
Thank you, Kica. Well, in our last minute or so, I'm going to give everyone that challenge. So if you all can share first of all, how folks can plug in and what is giving you hope in this moment. We've got wonderful attendees who, may want to get involved. So what can the non-lawyers, what can the community members do, and what's giving you hope to sustain you?
I'm happy to go because I feel like I was also pretty dark about our situation in Tennessee. But I will say, with our public education fight and our fight for immigrant kids' access, what gave me hope was just seeing how hungry people were for an opportunity to do something, anything. They wanted to take action. People from all across Tennessee who lived in rural districts, teachers who dedicated their whole careers to kids, wanted to take action. And what I realized as progressive movement is we just have to be ready to seize these moments of crisis and give people something to do. Phone banking, door knocking, sending a letter, telling your story, talking to the media. It's just such an incredible organizing opportunity throughout this crisis that we can't be paralyzed by fear or worry. We have to be ready to seize the opportunity to give people ways to take action.
I'll just jump in and say, during Trump 1.0, there was a real, particularly during family separation, there was just an incredible outpouring. I heard from people every single day, like from all walks of life, priests that wanted to work with detained kids, like people that spoke multiple languages that wanted to serve as interpreters. We were constantly getting requests of people reaching out of how to help. And we haven't experienced that this time around. And I would say it's only been very recently, like in the past couple of weeks, honestly, that I've started to get a trickle of folks that are reaching out that seem more concerned. I think leading up to the reconciliations passage, there was more awareness drawn to what's happening. I will say really clearly, family separation is alive and well, and it is happening in an even more extreme scale than it did during Trump 1.0. And for folks that are concerned by that and want to be involved, feel free to reach out to me. I think my contact information will be shared. It was welcome to email me. There are so many ways to help, and I do think that sharing, like with your friends, with your neighbors, like really paying attention to what's happening and talking about it publicly and reaching out to the movable middle is critical, because overall, I haven't yet seen the same degree of outrage and stepping up in the way that we did the first time around. And frankly, the stakes are way higher. They're just dramatically higher this time around. So we just have no choice, all of us. And particularly for those that are not the usual suspects in terms of allies, like reaching out to someone, that you see regularly at the supermarket, or people that might not have all the same shared values, but they have kids and they understand, like parents should be able to be with their kids. I mean, just basic humanity, like being able to reach out and make those connections and make sure folks know what's happening. And thank you all for being here, because that gives me hope.
Thank you. Well, hopefully you've successfully dialed up the outrage so that folks will be more aggressive in trying to plug in. We're so grateful to all of you for your work, your amazing work, and for your insights today. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us. As we shared in the chat, we will be following up likely early next week with an email with the recordings and resources from our panelists and their organizations. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you for joining us. Take care and please stay safe. Thank you.